John Matthews was a mechanic on a busy space station called Orion's Gate. He loved his job, but his life was simple and lonely. Every day, he worked on ships, fixing engines and checking parts. The sounds of machines and the smell of oil surrounded him. John felt comfortable in this world of metal and engines, but he often wished for something more. One sunny morning, while John was working on a small cargo ship, he noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered near the docking bay. Curious, he wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. He pushed through the crowd, wondering what was happening. As he got closer, he saw a woman standing there. She was not like anyone he had ever seen before. The woman had bright blue skin that sparkled in the sunlight. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her eyes glowed with a soft, warm light. She looked worried and sad. John felt a tug in his heart. He could see that she was an alien, but she looked human too, in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Excuse me, can I help you?" John asked gently, stepping forward. The woman turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. I am looking for someone to help me," she said in a soft voice, her words a mix of fear and hope. John's curiosity deepened. "What do you need help with?" "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice trembling. "My husband was killed in a space accident. I am left alone with my son, Kale. I need someone to help me take care of him." John's heart sank. He could hear the pain in her voice. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "Where is your son?" "He is waiting at our home," Lyra replied, her eyes filling with tears. "I do not know how to care for him alone. I do not understand your world. I am afraid." John felt a rush of emotions. He was not sure how he could help an alien and her child, but he could see Lyra's desperation. "Maybe I can help you," he offered. "Can you take me to your home?" Lyra nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you. I would be grateful." As they walked, John learned more about Lyra. She spoke of her home planet, Elysia, where the skies were purple and the trees sang songs. She described the beauty of her world, but her words were shadowed by sadness. "Kale does not understand that his father is gone," she said. "He is too young." John felt a pang of sympathy. He remembered how hard it was for him when he lost his parents. "I will do my best to help," he promised. When they reached Lyra's home, John was surprised. It was a small but cozy dwelling filled with bright colors and strange decorations. Alien toys were scattered on the floor, and a beautiful painting of Elysia hung on the wall. But the atmosphere felt heavy. John could sense the sadness that lingered in the air. "Kale, come here," Lyra called softly. A small child appeared from behind a curtain. He had green skin and large round eyes. Kale looked at John with a mix of curiosity and fear. He clutched a small toy spaceship tightly in his hands. "This is John," Lyra said gently. "He is here to help us." Kale stared at John, unsure of what to think. John knelt down to be at eye level with the boy. "Hey there, Kale. I'm here to help your mom," he said with a friendly smile. Kale blinked but didn't respond. John's heart ached for the boy. He could see the confusion and fear in Kale's eyes. John understood that trust takes time, especially for a child who had just lost his father. Lyra watched the two, her heart filled with hope. "Can you play with him, John?" she asked. "Maybe it will help him feel better." "Of course," John replied. He picked up a colorful toy from the floor. "How about we race our spaceships?" Kale's eyes lit up for a moment. He took a step closer, still clutching his toy. "Okay," he said softly. They sat on the floor, and John showed Kale how to race their toy spaceships. As they played, Kale began to smile, and John felt a warmth spread in his chest. For the first time since meeting Lyra, he felt a sense of purpose. He realized that helping them could bring joy back into their lives. After a while, Lyra joined them, sitting beside Kale. She smiled as she watched her son laugh. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have a gift with children." John shrugged, feeling shy. "I just want to help," he said. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the room, John knew that this was just the beginning. He had met two souls who needed him, and he felt a strange connection to them. Little did he know, this encounter would change his life forever. The Lonely Child. As the days passed, John Matthews found himself returning to Lyra's home often. Each visit felt like stepping into a new world. The bright colors of the alien decorations filled him with wonder, and the strange sounds of Elysian music played softly in the background. But amidst all this beauty, John noticed the deep sadness that lingered in the air. Kale, the small alien boy, was often quiet. He spent most of his time playing alone in a corner of the room. He had toys that looked like nothing John had ever seen before. Some glowed, while others made funny sounds. Yet, Kale rarely smiled. John wanted to help the boy find happiness, but he didn't know how. One afternoon, John sat on the floor with Kale, watching the boy play with a small glowing ball. Kale tossed it up, and it floated in the air for a moment before falling back into his hands. "Can I play too?" John asked, hoping to spark some joy in Kale's eyes. Kale looked at him with big round eyes, but didn't say anything. John felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He remembered how alone he had felt as a child after losing his parents. He wished he could reach out to Kale to show him that it was okay to feel safe again. "Let's play a game," John suggested, trying to sound cheerful. "How about a race? I bet I can throw this ball farther than you." Kale's eyes flickered with interest. He looked at the ball and then at John. Slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. John picked up the ball and threw it as far as he could. It soared through the air and landed a few feet away. "See, your turn," he encouraged. Kale took a deep breath and threw the ball with all his might. It flew through the air, but not as far as John's throw. Still, a small smile crept onto Kale's face. John's heart lifted. "Great job," John cheered. "You'll get better each time." They played together, and soon, the sound of laughter filled the room. Kale's smile grew wider, and for a moment, the shadows of grief faded away. After their game, John and Kale sat side by side, catching their breath. Kale looked up at John, his eyes shining. "Can you stay longer?" he asked shyly. John smiled warmly. "Of course I can. What would you like to do next?" Kale thought for a moment, then said, "Can you tell me stories about Earth?" John's heart swelled with happiness. "Absolutely. I have many stories." He began to share tales of Earth, stories of brave heroes, vast forests, and magical creatures. As he spoke, Kale listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. "Is there really a place where trees touch the sky?" Kale asked, his voice filled with excitement. "Yes, there are mountains so tall that they seem to scratch the clouds," John replied. "And in spring, the flowers bloom in colors you can't even imagine." Kale giggled. "I want to see that." Feeling inspired, John continued to weave tales of adventure and friendship, making sure to include Kale in the stories. They laughed together, and for the first time, John saw a glimpse of the happy boy Kale once was. As the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of orange and purple, Lyra entered the room. She watched them with a smile, feeling a mix of gratitude and hope. "What have you two been up to?" she asked, her voice warm. "John was telling me stories about Earth," Kale exclaimed, his excitement bubbling over. Lyra's smile grew wider. "That sounds wonderful. I'm so glad you two are having fun." John felt a sense of pride. He had started to build a bond with Kale, and it filled him with joy. "He has a great imagination," John said, looking at Kale. "I think he could be a hero in his own story." Kale beamed at the compliment. Lyra watched with tears in her eyes, grateful for John's kindness. She had worried about Kale's loneliness and had often felt helpless. But now, she could see a change in her son. The weight of grief seemed to lift, even if just a little. As they prepared to say goodbye for the day, Kale tugged on John's sleeve. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, his voice hopeful. "Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for the world," John replied, feeling a strong sense of connection with both Lyra and Kale. After John left, Lyra knelt beside Kale, who looked thoughtful. "You had fun today, didn't you?" she asked gently. Kale nodded. "Yes, Mama. John is nice. He tells stories like you." Lyra smiled, feeling a spark of hope. "I'm glad. Maybe he can help us become a family again." Kale looked up at his mother, his eyes bright with excitement. "Can we be a family like in the stories?" Lyra hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with love. "Yes, my sweet boy. We will find a way to make that happen." As Kale drifted off to sleep that night, his dreams were filled with adventures on Earth, colorful trees, and a brave mechanic who cared for him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging and hope. Learning together. As the days turned into weeks, John Matthews continued to visit Lyra and Kale. Each time, he felt more at home in their bright and colorful dwelling. John enjoyed their time together, but he knew that helping Kale heal from his loss was just as important as fixing a broken ship. He wanted to be a good friend, and maybe even a father figure to the young alien boy. One sunny morning, John arrived with a big smile on his face. "Good morning, Kale. Are you ready for some fun today?" he asked, stepping inside. Kale looked up from his toy spaceship, his eyes sparkling. "Yes. What are we going to do?" John thought for a moment. "How about we learn something new together? I want to teach you how to ride a bike." Kale's face lit up with excitement. "A bike? What is that?" John laughed softly. "It's a two-wheeled machine that you ride. It can take you fast and far. Let's go outside, and I'll show you." Lyra watched them, her heart full of hope. She had seen Kale grow more lively since John came into their lives. "Be careful, both of you," she called as they stepped outside. John led Kale to the small bike he had brought. It was bright red and shiny. "This is my bike," he said, patting the seat. "It might be a little big for you, but we can make it work." Kale looked at the bike with wide eyes. "Can I really ride it?" "Of course. First, let's just sit on it and get used to the feel. Then, I will show you how to balance," John explained. He helped Kale climb onto the bike. Kale wobbled at first, but quickly found his balance. "This is fun," Kale shouted, his laughter filling the air. "Great job. Now, I will hold the back to help you learn to pedal," John said. He pushed the bike gently as Kale began to pedal. At first, Kale struggled to keep his balance. He leaned too far to one side and almost fell over. But John was quick to catch him. "You're doing well. Just remember to keep your body straight and look ahead." With each try, Kale grew more confident. He laughed and squealed with joy. Soon, he was pedaling faster and faster, and John could see the delight on his face. After a while, John let go of the bike. "Okay, Kale, try to ride on your own." Kale looked surprised. "But what if I fall?" "Falling is part of learning," John said with encouragement. "Just get back up and try again." Kale took a deep breath and started pedaling. At first, he wobbled a bit, but then he found his balance and began to ride smoothly. "I'm doing it. I'm riding," he shouted, beaming with joy. John clapped his hands, cheering. "You're amazing, Kale. Keep going." As Kale rode around in circles, John felt a rush of happiness. He had not only taught Kale something new, but had also helped him find joy in life again. Kale's laughter filled the air, and Lyra watched from the porch, tears of happiness in her eyes. After a while, Kale stopped and jumped off the bike. "That was so much fun. Can we do it again tomorrow?" he asked, panting with excitement. "Of course," John replied. "We can make it a daily adventure." As they sat on the grass, Kale looked up at John with a serious expression. "John, do you have a family?" he asked quietly. John hesitated, memories of his parents flashing through his mind. "I did, but they are gone now. I live alone," he said softly. "But that's why I want to help you and your mom. I want to be part of your family." Kale's eyes brightened. "Can you be my family?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. John smiled warmly. "If you'll have me, I would love that. You and your mom have become very special to me." Lyra, overhearing their conversation, felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She approached them, wrapping her arms around Kale and John. "Thank you for being here for us, John. You are a blessing in our lives," she said, her voice full of emotion. As they sat together on the grass, John felt a sense of belonging he had longed for. He realized that they were not just friends, they were becoming a family. Later that day, John taught Kale some basic Earth games. They played tag, and Kale laughed and chased after John, who pretended to be a silly alien monster. Lyra watched with joy as her son's laughter echoed in the air. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant colors, Kale looked up at John. "Can we always play together?" he asked, his eyes shining. John nodded. "Yes, we can, and I will always be here for you. We will learn and have fun together every day." Kale hugged John tightly, his small arms wrapping around him. John felt a warmth spread in his heart, knowing he was becoming more than just a mechanic. He was becoming a mentor, a friend, and a father figure to Kale. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Lyra prepared a special Elysian meal. The three of them shared stories and laughter around the table. For the first time, Lyra felt hope for the future. With John by their side, they were ready to face the challenges ahead. Facing the world. As the days turned into weeks, John Matthews, Lyra, and Kale formed a close bond. They shared laughter and adventures, and Kale began to smile more often. However, John knew that their happiness would be tested when they faced the outside world. The space station was a busy place, filled with different people and cultures. Not everyone would accept their unique family. One afternoon, John decided to take Kale and Lyra to the market. It was a bustling place with shops selling all kinds of strange and wonderful things. Bright colors filled the stalls, and the sounds of chatter and laughter surrounded them. John felt excited to show them the wonders of Earth, but he also felt nervous. He hoped people would accept them as a family. As they walked through the market, Kale held onto John's hand tightly, his eyes wide with wonder. "Look at all the things," he exclaimed, pointing at glowing fruit and strange gadgets. "Everything here is so different from Elysia," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "But it is beautiful in its own way." John smiled, feeling proud to show them his world. He wanted Kale to experience all the joy Earth had to offer. "Let's try some of the food. I think you'll love it," he suggested, leading them to a food stall. They approached a vendor selling colorful treats. "What would you like to try?" John asked Kale, who was staring at a pile of bright, sugary sweets. Kale's eyes lit up. "Those look yummy," he said, pointing excitedly. John purchased some sweets, and they all took a bite. Kale's face lit up with delight. "This is amazing," he said, grinning from ear to ear. Lyra smiled, enjoying the moment with her son. Just then, a group of people walked by. They stared at John, Lyra, and Kale, their eyes filled with surprise and confusion. John noticed their glares and felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He held Kale's hand a little tighter, wanting to protect him. One man in the group spoke up, his voice loud and harsh. "What is that alien doing here with a human? And who is that kid?" John's heart raced. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He turned to face the man. "This is my family," he said firmly, but he could feel Kale's hand trembling in his grip. The man laughed, a cruel sound. "Family. You think you can just take an alien and make it your own? They don't belong here." Kale looked up at John, fear in his eyes. Lyra moved closer, her protective instincts kicking in. "We are a family," she said, her voice steady. "We deserve to be here just like anyone else." The crowd grew quiet, some people looking uncomfortable. Others stared with interest, but the man sneered. "You think you can just play house with an alien child? You don't know what you're doing." John felt anger rise within him. "I care for Kale and Lyra. They are my family, and I will protect them," he said, his voice strong. Kale squeezed John's hand tighter, looking scared but also proud. Lyra stood tall beside them, her gaze fierce. Suddenly, a woman from the crowd stepped forward. She had long brown hair and kind eyes. "Leave them alone," she said firmly. "They have the right to be together. Love knows no boundaries." The man scoffed but didn't say anything more. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, some nodding in agreement with the woman. John felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had faced the world, and while it hadn't gone perfectly, they had stood together as a family. Once the crowd had thinned, Kale looked up at John with admiration. "You were brave," he said, his voice soft. John smiled, kneeling down to Kale's level. "We are all brave when we stand up for each other. Family means protecting one another, no matter what." Lyra placed a hand on Kale's shoulder, feeling proud of both the boys. "You are learning to be strong, Kale. It is okay to feel scared, but it is important to stand tall," she said. They continued exploring the market, but the tension lingered in John's mind. He knew they would face challenges, but he felt grateful for the support they had received. They stopped at a stall filled with colorful scarves and trinkets. John picked out a small charm for Kale, a bright blue star, just like Lyra's eyes. "This is for you, Kale, to remind you that you shine bright, no matter what others say," he said, handing it to the boy. Kale's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, John. I will keep it forever." He slipped the charm around his neck, feeling proud. As they walked home, Lyra turned to John. "Thank you for standing up for us. It means more than you know," she said softly. John nodded. "We are a team, and I will always be here for both of you. We will face the world together." That night, as they sat around the dinner table, the air felt lighter. They shared stories and laughter, grateful for the love they had found in each other. Kale looked at John and Lyra, his heart full. "I am so happy we are a family," he said, his voice sincere. John smiled, feeling the warmth spread through him. "Me too, Kale. No matter what happens outside, we will always have each other." With that promise, they continued to build their life together, ready to face whatever challenges the world might bring. A kidnapping. The days turned into weeks, and life for John, Lyra, and Kale became a happy routine. They explored the space station, played games, and shared stories every evening. However, deep down, John felt a shadow lurking. He worried that their happiness could be taken away. His fears came true one fateful afternoon. It was a bright day, and John had promised to take Kale to the park. They were excited to ride bikes and play together. Lyra waved goodbye as they left, her smile warm and loving. "Have fun, you too," she called out. At the park, laughter and joy filled the air. Children were playing, and families gathered under the trees. John felt happy watching Kale ride his bike with glee. "Look at me, John," Kale shouted as he pedaled faster, his laughter ringing through the park. Suddenly, John noticed a group of strangers watching them. They stood a bit apart, wearing dark clothes and serious expressions. John felt uneasy, but he tried to shake it off. "Keep riding, Kale," he called, forcing a smile. But just as John turned his attention back to Kale, he heard a commotion. A loud shout pierced the air. "Grab the kid," one of the strangers yelled. Before John could react, two of the men rushed toward Kale. Panic surged through him. "Kale, run," John shouted, but the words were lost in the chaos. The men grabbed Kale, pulling him away from his bike. No, let him go, John yelled, racing toward them. He lunged forward, but the men were strong. They shoved him aside, and John stumbled to the ground. Kale kicked and screamed, his tiny voice filled with fear. John, help me. With every ounce of strength, John fought to get back on his feet. He saw Kale struggling against the men, his eyes wide with terror. Rage and determination filled John's heart. He couldn't let them take Kale. Stop! You can't take him, John shouted, charging at the men. He pushed one of them aside, making room to reach Kale. But the second man grabbed him, holding him back. In the midst of the chaos, a woman in the crowd stepped forward. Someone help! They are trying to take that child, she cried, her voice strong. People started to notice the scene unfolding. A few rushed to help John. Let him go, a man shouted, grabbing one of the kidnappers by the arm. For a moment, the confusion reigned. The kidnappers looked around, realizing they were losing control. In a desperate move, one of them pulled out a small device that made a loud sound. The noise echoed, causing everyone to cover their ears. John felt a surge of fear. Kale, stay strong, he yelled, trying to break free from the grip of the man holding him back. The noise drew more attention. A group of security officers approached, alerted by the chaos. What's happening here? One of them shouted, stepping forward. The kidnappers exchanged worried glances. We're just trying to take the boy, one of them shouted, but their confidence was fading. The officer responded firmly, let him go now. You are under arrest. With the arrival of the officers, the kidnappers hesitated, knowing they were outnumbered. They exchanged looks of fear and then made a sudden decision. We can't do this, one of them yelled as they turned to run. Stop right there, the officer shouted, chasing after them. John rushed to Kale, who was still held tightly by one of the men. Kale, I'm here, he cried, reaching out to the boy. With one last burst of energy, John pulled free from the man holding him and ran to Kale. He pushed the kidnapper away and wrapped his arms around Kale, holding him tightly. You're safe now. I've got you, he said, feeling Kale trembling in his embrace. The officers quickly apprehended the kidnappers, securing them with handcuffs. The crowd that had gathered watched in relief as the danger passed. Kale looked up at John, tears in his eyes. I was so scared, he whispered, his voice shaking. I know, buddy. I'm here. You're safe, John reassured him, holding him close. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also anger at what had just happened. As the officers led the kidnappers away, one of them approached John and Kale. Are you two okay? He asked, his tone gentle. John nodded, still holding Kale tightly. We are now, thanks to everyone who helped. The officer smiled. Good. It's important to stay together in places like this. We'll keep an eye on things. Just make sure to be aware of your surroundings. Lyra appeared in the distance, running toward them, panic etched on her face. Kale, John, are you okay? She shouted, her eyes wide with worry. We're fine, Mama, Kale called, waving to her. Lyra rushed to them, wrapping her arms around both of them. Thank the stars you're safe, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. I felt something was wrong when I saw the crowd. John looked at her, grateful yet shaken. They tried to take him, but we stopped them. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, relief flooding through her. Thank you for protecting my son, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. John nodded, his heart heavy. I'll always protect him. He's family. As they walked home, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the space station. The ordeal had shaken them, but it also brought them closer. They knew they could face anything together, as a family. A new start. After the terrifying event at the park, John, Lyra, and Kale found themselves even closer as a family. The fear from the kidnapping lingered in their minds, but they were determined to move forward. They had faced danger together and come out stronger. Now, it was time to focus on building a brighter future. The next day, John decided to take a day off work. He wanted to spend time with Lyra and Kale, helping them feel safe and secure again. "How about we have a fun day at home?" he suggested, a smile on his face. "We can play games and watch movies." Kale's eyes lit up. "Yes, I want to watch the funny movie about the talking cat," he exclaimed. Lyra laughed softly. "I think that movie is a good choice. It always makes us laugh," she said, feeling the weight of the previous day lift a little. They spent the morning preparing snacks. John and Kale made popcorn while Lyra arranged colorful fruits on a plate. The kitchen was filled with laughter as they joked and teased each other. Kale loved helping, feeling like a big part of the family. "Look at this," Kale said, holding up a bowl of popcorn that spilled over. "I made a mountain." John chuckled. "A mountain of popcorn. Perfect for our movie adventure." Once everything was ready, they settled on the couch. The movie started, and soon they were all laughing together. Kale was giggling so hard he could hardly breathe. John and Lyra exchanged happy glances, grateful for this moment of joy. After the movie ended, John turned to Kale. "What do you want to do next? We can play outside or do a craft project," he offered. Kale thought for a moment, his face scrunching up in concentration. "Can we paint? I want to make a picture for you and Mama," he said excitedly. "Painting sounds wonderful." Lyra agreed, her heart warming at the thought. "Let's get the supplies." They gathered paints, brushes, and big sheets of paper. John set up the art station on the patio, letting the warm sun wash over them. Kale was filled with energy, excited to create something special. As they began to paint, John and Lyra guided Kale. "You can use any color you want," John encouraged. "Let your imagination run wild." Kale painted with bright colors, mixing shades and creating shapes. He drew a big sun with a smiley face and fluffy clouds. "This is the happiest sun ever," he declared proudly. Lyra watched, her heart swelling with love. "It's beautiful, Kale. You are a great artist," she praised. "Thanks, Mama." Kale beamed, feeling proud of his work. "And you're my favorite model." John laughed. "I hope I make a good model. I'll try to be as colorful as Cal's sun." As they painted, the atmosphere felt light and cheerful. They shared stories, and Kale asked questions about Earth and Elysia. "What is it like on your planet?" he asked curiously. Lyra smiled, thinking back to her home. "It is different from here, but it is beautiful. There are tall trees, bright flowers, and the sky is often purple during sunset." Cal's eyes widened. "Purple sky. That sounds amazing. Can we go there one day?" John smiled, ruffling Cal's hair. "Maybe one day. For now, let's make this home as happy as we can." As they continued to paint, Kale suddenly grew serious. "Will the bad people come back?" he asked, his voice small. John's heart ached at the question. He kneeled beside Kale, looking him in the eyes. "We won't let that happen. We are a family, and families protect each other. I will always keep you safe." Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "We will also stay close and watch for each other. Together, we can face anything." Kale looked at them, his eyes filled with trust. "Okay, I believe you," he said, feeling reassured. After they finished painting, they cleaned up and decided to take a walk around the space station. They explored new areas, met friendly neighbors, and played with other children. Cal's laughter rang out, a joyful sound that filled John and Lyra's hearts with warmth. As they walked, they saw a group of kids playing tag. Cal's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Can I join them?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "Of course. We will watch from here," John replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. Kale ran off to join the other kids, and John and Lyra stood close by, watching with pride. It was a beautiful sight to see Kale laughing and playing, his fears fading away. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with warm colors, Kale returned, breathless and happy. "That was so much fun. I made new friends," he exclaimed. "See, you are brave and strong," John said, kneeling down to Kale's level. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you, John," Kale said, his smile brightening the evening. As they walked home together, Lyra felt a deep sense of gratitude. The world outside may be unpredictable, but inside their home, they had love and support. They had found a new start together. Later that night, as they settled in for bed, Kale hugged his new charm tightly. "I love you both," he said, his voice soft. "We love you too, Kale." "Always," John and Lyra replied in unison, feeling their hearts swell with love. With that promise, they drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, together as a family. A family together. The sun rose gently over the space station, casting warm light through the windows of John, Lyra, and Kale's home. The sounds of soft laughter and playful chatter filled the air as they began their day. It was a beautiful morning, and each of them felt grateful for the love and happiness they had found together. Kale woke up early, excited to start a new day. He jumped out of bed and raced to the kitchen. "Good morning, John." "Good morning, Mama," he shouted, his voice full of joy. "Good morning, Kale," John replied, smiling as he prepared breakfast. "Are you ready for a fun day?" "Yes. I want to help make pancakes," Kale exclaimed, his eyes shining. Lyra joined them, brushing her hair and wearing a bright smile. "I love pancakes. What kind should we make today?" she asked, her voice cheerful. "Chocolate chip," Kale shouted, bouncing on his toes. "Please." "Chocolate chip it is," John laughed, grabbing the ingredients. The three of them worked together in the kitchen, mixing batter and pouring it onto the hot griddle. The smell of sweet pancakes filled the air, and soon they were enjoying a delicious breakfast together. After breakfast, they decided to visit the community center. John had heard about a special event for families that day, and he thought it would be a great opportunity for Kale to make more friends. "Let's see what fun activities they have," he said, excitement in his voice. As they arrived at the community center, they were greeted by friendly faces. There were games, crafts, and many happy families. Kale's eyes widened in amazement. "Look at all the fun things we can do," he shouted, pulling his parents toward the activities. They started at the art station, where kids were painting and drawing. Kale grabbed a brush and joined in, creating colorful pictures that made him proud. Lyra and John watched, happy to see him so engaged. "Your art is getting better every day." Lyra praised Kale, kneeling beside him to admire his work. "I'm going to paint a picture of our family," Kale declared, mixing colors with excitement. After the art station, they moved on to the game area. There were various games set up, from ring toss to a small obstacle course. Kale ran toward the obstacle course, his face glowing with enthusiasm. "Can I try it?" he asked, looking up at his parents. "Of course. Go for it," John encouraged, proud to see his son's confidence. Kale tackled the obstacle course with determination, climbing over barriers and crawling under nets. He laughed as he raced through, his heart full of joy. John and Lyra cheered him on, their hearts swelling with pride. "You're doing great, Kale," Lyra shouted, clapping her hands. When Kale finished, he jumped up and down with excitement. "That was so much fun. Can I do it again?" he asked, his eyes sparkling. "Absolutely. Go ahead," John replied, his smile wide. As Kale ran back to the start, John turned to Lyra. "I'm so proud of him. He's grown so much since we first met," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Lyra nodded, her eyes misty with joy. "He has found his place with us, and we are a family now," she said softly. After the games, they enjoyed lunch together, sharing stories and laughter. The community center was filled with families, all celebrating together. Kale spoke about his adventures, making new friends, and learning new skills. Later, they discovered a storytelling corner where a kind woman read stories to a group of children. Kale was mesmerized, sitting on the floor with his eyes glued to the storyteller. John and Lyra joined him, happy to share this moment. The stories took them on adventures to distant lands, filled with heroes and magical creatures. Kale listened with awe, imagining himself as the brave hero of the tales. When the story ended, he clapped his hands with delight. "That was amazing," he said, beaming. As the day went on, John, Lyra, and Kale explored more activities together. They played games, made crafts, and even joined in a family dance. Laughter echoed around them, and for that moment, they felt completely at home. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the family gathered outside. They watched as families danced and sang together, celebrating love and togetherness. Kale leaned against John, feeling safe and happy. "I love our family," he whispered, a soft smile on his face. John wrapped his arm around Kale and Lyra. "We love you too, buddy. This is just the beginning for us," he said, his heart full. Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We have each other, and together we can face anything. No matter what happens, we will always be a family." As they stood together, watching the world around them, Kale felt a sense of belonging. He had found his place, and he knew that no matter the challenges, love would always guide them. The day ended with the three of them walking home hand in hand, the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky above. They talked about their favorite moments from the day, laughter filling the air. When they arrived home, they settled in for the night, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow would bring. Kale crawled into bed, clutching his charm tightly, feeling safe and loved. As John and Lyra tucked him in, they shared a quiet moment together. "Good night, my little hero," John said softly, kissing Kale's forehead. "Good night, Mama and John." "I love you," Kale replied, his eyes closing peacefully. With that, John and Lyra stepped out of the room, their hearts full of love for their little family. Together, they faced the future, ready for more adventures and cherished moments, knowing they were truly a family together.